microphone not on the mic?
No,
I can.
No.
not in the back.
So you can hear me now?
Yes. Excellent.
So I was actually going to give you a presentation with on Keynote, which was very nice. But now I'm going to read from it because the technology isn't quite working the way we hoped we would get it to work. So I will just... What I'm speaking to as a scientist, and when I went to Dr. Marjorie Curtis's course, Do We Need a Carbon Tax? So,
Password.
no, you don't have to. You just click on that and find the bottom and find the internet browser. That's what you can find.
Make your pencil.
Down the bottom it should come up. If we can't find it, never mind. So, I was attending Marjorie Curtis's course and Do We Need a Carbon Tax at the University of Third Age for retired people. Sorry, I'll stick with the microphone. And I got to the course and it was a real eye-opener for me because I went on thinking, yes, we do need a carbon tax and this is going to be rather boring, but I may as well find out. And then Marjorie went around and started to present evidence that we didn't need a carbon tax. And she, about halfway through the course, and especially when we got to the ClimateGate emails, I realised that the evidence that it was a politically driven global scam was far more robust than the evidence of global warming. So, my scientific side came out and I started my own research. And tonight I will be on my first overhead, my imaginary overhead up here. I'm repeating the words of Dr. Henry Lamb. And he says, on his first overhead of his first of 5 videos about the rise of global governance, he says world government equals global governance as rape equals date rape. One begins with seduction, both end in violence. So what he was saying was that you can have your freedom taken away from you in a war by military action, or you can have it stolen from you, possibly over a number of generations. So now I'll go to my next imaginary overhead. Now, how did we get to where we are today? How did we get to where our democracy is in danger of slipping into tyranny? We got there, from a science perspective, the progressive politicisation of science which has resulted in the loss of scientific integrity all over the democratic world. Now I can go back to the start of what we see as the latest round of the battle between good and evil on planet Earth. And we go back to the atmospheric science where actually honest mistakes occurred. And we go to the work of Fourier, Lavoisier, Langley and Arthenis. In 1824, Lavoisier was measuring oxygen. See, this was all new at the time. They designed their own equipment to measure these atmospheric gases. Then after him, so that was about 200 years ago. And then after him, about 120 years ago, Langley measured carbon dioxide. And he developed his own equipment. And as science is, it learns from its mistakes and it moves forward with the proper empirical method of falsification. You have to prove a theory wrong before you can advance a new theory. And anyway, so Langley measured carbon dioxide. Artemis followed him some 20 or 30 years later, so we're at the beginning of the 19th century. And he based his equipment on Langley's equipment. And it turned out that Langley's equipment wasn't actually measuring carbon dioxide, it was measuring water vapour. So from those honest mistakes of that century comes the whole term, the greenhouse effect. That was coined by Fourier at the time, in 1824. So now we're going to turn to a slightly more sinister development, because these were honest mistakes, and that's how science advances, it learns from its mistakes. So we're now going to Russia in the 1920s. And Lysenko was a Russian farmer / agriculturalist who became a scientist, and he faked his data. His genetic seed data he faked in order to become Stalin's darling. And of course at the time no one knew, and he was Stalin's darling. And in Russia in the 1920s, scientists who challenged his methodology, and some of them thought it was absolutely incorrect, some of them were shot by firing squad. That was what happened if you didn't agree with the consensus opinion in Russia at the time. So Lysenko actually developed seeds. He discarded the Mendelian genetics theory for agricultural seeds, and he developed his own genetic seed breeding program, and professed that he had very, very durable, robust seeds which would actually pass their traits down the generations. And the story of the famine that followed when the crops failed in the Ukraine is a story for another day. But anyway, so Lysenko, who faked his data, was eventually exposed. This was not until after 1953, when Stalin died. And then the other scientists, the ones that had survived, came out of the woodwork and proved him wrong. And Lysenko himself, was also sent to the Gulag, where he died. So the only good thing, excuse my heavy breathing, the only good thing about what happened at that time was that at least the Russians held him accountable for his actions. And that Lysenkoism now is used metaphorically to describe the manipulation and distortion of a scientific process as a way to reach a predetermined conclusion as dictated by an ideological bias, often related to social or political objectives. So now we'll go to America and to the Odom brothers. And all the links are here. And I promise that in a few days this will be up on the Galileo website and you can follow the links, because they're actually very, very interesting. And some of them are very, very enjoyable. For example, the one about the Odom brothers is an hour-long documentary by Adam Curtis, who's a fantastic documentarian. It has archival footage and it has beautiful music. So it's good if you're on a long plane flight or a trip or... So, the Odom brothers in America were regarded as prestigious scientists in the USA from around the 1930s until they both died in 2002. But it turns out they also faked their data. To prove, not to test, but to prove that their hypothesis that nature is in equilibrium, the Gaia hypothesis, to be all heard of, and the nature and balance is also the same hypothesis that they've proved. And the insidious assumption that underpins that is that if nature is so perfectly in balance, if anything goes wrong, it must be our fault. Because all the other species are living in balance and harmony. So, I'll just go to the next slide, if I can. We'll do it that way. Okay? So now, we're still getting to where we are today. So what happened and how we found out that the Odum brothers had faked their data is 30 years later, with the invention of the desktop computer, a new generation of ecologists went out to replicate their work. And they found they got a bigger sample because they had more computing ability, and they found, hey, there's no fit. So they put more and more data in, and it didn't get any better. So in hindsight, they look back and they see that there is no other explanation than the Odum brothers had smoothed their data, moved the outliers without disclosure, till they had a very good fit. And they became extremely wealthy. Eugene went on to write the book Fundamentals of Ecology, which was a textbook in many countries of the world. And he went on to join the Club of Rome and became a policy maker. Now, so what happened with this there was so much hostility from the establishment when these new ecologists tried to make their voices heard, just the same hostility that is against independent science today who are saying, this climate change is a lot of rubbish. But, so what happened is that the nature is in equilibrium theory, otherwise known as Gaia, or the balance of nature, was not only disproven but also discredited in the 1970s. I'm quoting from Wikipedia, and the links are down the bottom, and was, in my words, supposedly replaced by chaos theory. But the Odum brothers were never held accountable for falsifying their data. And what chaos theory states, and this is from Wikipedia also, which is a lot better than the peer-reviewed research in climate science. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, chaos theory states that small differences in initial conditions, such as those due to rounding errors in numerical computation, yield widely diverging outcomes for dynamical systems, such as weather and climate. Rendering long-term prediction impossible in general. So that's in Wikipedia. Now, the unfortunate thing about all of this is that you only have to look at the 2009 Australian National Science Curriculum to realise that Gaia is alive and well and still being taught in Australian schools, and that chaos theory has been quietly discarded. And now I come to the modern part of the whole saga, because the evidence now indicates that some scientists at the Australian Bureau of Meteorology have also falsified their data. Why? Lysenkoisms. The same thing. To describe the manipulation or distortion of the scientific process as a way to reach a predetermined conclusion, as dictated by an ideological bias often related to social or political objectives. And the scientists who have succumbed to Lysenkoism seem to have done it to become the darlings of the politicians and the darlings of the global scene. And all this comes from Wikipedia. Now, this is where I would show you, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll put it on play, and I'll walk. I'll show you the first row, and this will be on the internet in a few days. Here is the map of Australia. There is Central Australia. There, in the left-hand panel, is a particular day of a particular month on subsequent years. And they're all more or less identical. Whereas if you look at the same period of time, in recent times, they're actually different on subsequent years. So this is analogous to you, for example, today, wearing that outfit, managing to wear that exact outfit on this date next year without even realising it. And to do it on subsequent years for more than a decade. This is more than a decade that's measured where they're the same. So that is how scientists know that this must be, there's the most plausible explanation. I'll go back to the most plausible explanation. Did you all hear the analogy to how you dress, or would you like me to repeat it? No. So what this left-hand panel is showing you is that, for instance, you, sir, in the red parka, the outfit that you're wearing tonight, you could, on this date next year, you would be wearing the same outfit without really knowing it. And then a year later, on this day, you would be wearing, again, the same outfit. Over subsequent years, for more than a decade, it looks like up to 2 or 3 decades, up to 1950s, that the data has been adjusted to show, first of all, it shows quite a cool climate, and it is just the same every year. Now, Volkswagen, is it Volkswagen? Are under investigation for fraud for their illegal software, which has they managed to reduce their emissions somehow. And what they have done is no different from what the Bureau of Meteorology has done. But it is world's best practice, as they say. It's done in England, it's done elsewhere. And it's time that people were held accountable so that we can recover and move on. And now I'm going to go, so I'll skip past that now. Now I'm actually going to go to part of the point of tonight's discussion, where we're going to look at the International Academy of Sciences Commission's review of the IPCC's, this is all terminal assessment report number 4, which was published in 2010. And I did a brief word count. First of all, the term climate change is not a testable hypothesis. It is gobbledygook. Basically, we had, and the history behind it is we had, global cooling in the 60s, and we're all going to freeze to death, and it was because we liked CO2. And then the 80s came, and it was getting warm, and basically it was all our fault under the nature, the Gaia theory, that everything is in equilibrium. It must be all our fault for burning fossil fuels and creating CO2. And now that it's done both, well, the climate is changing. totally untestable hypothesis, and it's all our fault for burning fossil fuels. Now, I was with this document, I had another poster up here, which is a poster designed for primary school children, actually, and it refers to Viv Forbes' work, and basically, as Viv Forbes has described the composition of the water vapour and everything else that comes out the chimney or the stack of a coal-fired power station. And from memory, I think that nitrogen was the most, it was over 60%. Next was carbon dioxide, about a bit over 20%. And then there was 3 or 4 others. And only 2% was possibly a little bit of soot, which is a regional thing and falls down around the power station. That's why we have our power stations in isolated positions. So, getting back to this report, the term carbon dioxide is totally misused through the whole IPC assessment report number 4, because it's only used in conjunction with words like the words tax, price, energy intensity. Not once they look at what the benefits of carbon dioxide are. And if you look even further down this page, it says, and this is quoting from the document, for any geographical region, CO2 emissions are the product of population, GDP per capita, energy usage per dollar, and they go on in that manner. Now, you don't know really what they mean by population, but further down the page, they talk about how their models are measuring population increase. And now here is where I would magically take you out to another poster, which is based on the work of Marie Selby. And it has a map of our globe with the carbon dioxide levels all over the globe portrayed. And the red colours on this imaginary, not imaginary, sorry, absolutely real graphic show that over the Amazon basin and subtropical Africa are where the highest levels of carbon dioxide are. Not over our industrialised cities. There are no high levels over Australia. Australia is green, which is about 350 parts per million. Over the Amazon basin, where it's high, there are about 390 parts per million. This is going back a couple of years, right? And so the question from that is, if the carbon dioxide levels are highest over subtropical Africa and the Amazon basin, why? How could it be possibly due to human industry? And why aren't those higher levels, if they're over natural vegetation, a good thing? And we also have CSIRO work now showing that they call it the fertilisation effect of carbon dioxide, that parts of Australia have actually become greener over the last 20 years. And that comes from our own CSIRO. Now, the third question that comes from that poster, which you'll see in a few days, I hope. Well, I know it will be there, but I hope that you will look at it. And I will tell you right now how to look at it, actually, if you like to write something down with a pen. The link that you can type into your computer is bit.ly TGM-JR. And that takes you to the Galileo Movement's site and to my page and Dr. Margaret Curtis's
Could
page.
you repeat that, please?
Yes, it is bit.ly/.
Sorry, is that L-Y or L?
Y for yellow. I'll write it down actually later and have it.
Problem here with the old time.
Oh, okay, all right. So we'll move it. Sorry. So basically, I'll write it down on some paper and put it up there. So we're actually up to the summary points now. The summary points are that the review of the IPC's AR4 was damning. I agree. The terms were used incorrectly. Our democracy has been systematically and progressively weakened by the United Nations, who were using this misleading terminology in an attempt to confuse and thus rule us as an unelected government. We want our country back. I don't want to have to wake up in the morning and still be having to apologise to the United Nations for not being a good participant in a pointless, divisive international competition to meet some target that's for a non-existent problem and one that is predicated on deceit. Now, the evidence shows that the IPC, UNFCCC and the Environmental Protection Agency are peopled and probably controlled by some white-collar criminals. And the links here go to Maurice Strong, Stefan Schmidheiny and John Beale. And they're all on the internet. The evidence is there. Now, I can't go into more details because I'm out of time. Thank you.